12 Swedish stereotypes from my perspective as an American living in Sweden. Hey everyone, I'm Brennan. I am a nurse who moved to Sweden 5 years ago and has been living here in Sweden ever since and working as a nurse, learned the language and integrated myself. Before coming to Sweden, I really didn't know a whole lot about Sweden. I heard a few things like about the Vikings were here. I knew it was farther up on the globe and so it's probably colder, which was a big reason I moved here because I like cold weather. But other than that, I really didn't know very much about Sweden. But then when I decided to come here, I started hearing different things from people about Sweden that were stereotypical. And then after living here in Sweden, I've had a lot of people, both in the United States and people that come here and visit Sweden, as well as other people around the world, and their typical stereotypes they have of this country. And so I'm going to go through 12 of them and kind of share my point of view on these. Are they true stereotypes? Do they hold any water? And I'd love to see what you guys think. And number one, Swedes are not friendly. I actually did a whole video on that, and I'll leave a link in the video for that if you want to go back and watch that. But Swedes, are they friendly? Are they not? It is pretty well documented. There is a lot of videos out there about Swedes being kind of a cold, reserved people, not liking to do small talk, neighbors avoiding each other, people looking through peepholes of their doors in their apartments to make sure nobody's coming out so they don't have to talk to them in the corridor. I've actually witnessed this myself. But does this mean that they're not friendly? Well, it really depends. I've actually seen some people that actually say that they think that the Swedish people are a very warm and helpful type people and they just are reserved and keep to themselves. And then I've heard people say quite differently. So it's something that's very relative to the person that you're asking. I can say I have a lot of Swedish friends. I think learning the Swedish language has helped a whole lot for me to integrate myself and make a lot of Swedish friends. But if you were to compare an American, say from where I come in the south of the United States compared to here in Sweden, I would say my experience is Swedes do tend to be a little bit colder, generally speaking, and reserved and a bit more socially awkward than in the United States. But once you get to know them, if you can get them to loosen up a little bit and get them to talk to you, they can actually be really great friends. And just know that, there are Swedish unicorns. Not everybody fits the mold. There are a lot of very friendly, outgoing Swedish people that don't fit this stereotype. So not everyone's the same. Number two, Swedes are open-minded and tolerant. This was something that I had read about, that they were a very progressive society, very left-leaning, very open-minded and tolerant. And what is my thought on this? I would say it depends. I was actually quite shocked about, and I know a lot of people are going to eat me up in the comments, but this is my personal opinion and my personal experience. So maybe you've had a different experience and neither of us are wrong. I'm going to just be straight up and honest with you here. And when I first came to Sweden, I was shocked by the racism. I was literally told things like, you don't want to live in that neighborhood because there's a certain people that are there. You don't want to shop from that certain type of store because there's a certain people that work there. In Sweden, it's almost a weekly thing. I'm constantly seeing, in fact, it's been the news here about racist doctors that are going to the University of Lund. It's shocking to me of the discrimination and racism here in this country. And I thought, Sweden is a very open-minded, progressive country. And I realized the majority of Swedes are open-minded, tolerant, and very kind people and don't have a problem with different races. A third one, this is kind of a funny one. This is one of the few stereotypes that I heard in the United States. And it wasn't until I decided to move to Sweden, I told everybody, hey, I'm going to be going to Sweden. I'm going to try to work as a nurse. And what do you think the first thing is that I heard? The most common thing that I heard as a stereotype is, you go into one of them, they are communist countries where they got that communist medicine. And I was like, no, it's not communist. It's, a social democracy. And I would say, is it communist? Well, by the book, no. But what's interesting is it depends on who you ask. There are Swedes that say that it is communist. There are Swedes that say it's not communist. I'm going to leave that one for you guys to answer in the comment section. You tell me what you think. I don't think it's a communist land because I know of some communist lands. I've actually been to Vietnam, which is a communist country. And so I've seen a different perspective. But I would love to hear from you guys and see what you think about that. Number four, all Swedes are blonde, blue-eyed, and good-looking. And this is not always true. There are a lot of Swedes that have dark hair. There are Swedes that have brown eyes. There is a lot of variation. Although you will see proportionally probably more blue hair. Sorry, not blue hair. Well, those exist here too. But blue-eyed, blonde-haired, got that right, more than, say, in places like the United States. Number 5, another one that I heard a lot. They sound like the Swedish Chef. If you don't know what that is, Google Swedish Chef, and you will find the stereotypical thing that Americans or other people say about Swedish people, that they sound like the Swedish Chef. And I do not agree with that. They do not sound anything like the Swedish Chef. And number 6, Swedes are so tall. This one is something that I didn't really hear until I came to Sweden. And then when I tell people, oh, I live in Sweden, they're like, oh, people are so tall and good looking and blonde hair and blue-eyed. I'm like, that hasn't been my experience. I've been to places like the Netherlands. Now, people are tall there. I even dated a girl from the Netherlands, and she was 6'8". I thought, yeah, this is going to be weird, but I'm going to give it a shot and be open-minded. The height was kind of an issue. But here in Sweden, everyone that I've been interested in has actually been the same height as me or shorter. I would feel like Sweden is a very mixed bag. You have people that are guys that are Swedish that are 5'4", versus, you know, some guys are 6 foot tall. But if you were to compare it to a place like, say, perhaps the Netherlands, you're going to see a really big difference where almost everybody I run across in the Netherlands is way taller than someone like me who's only 5'8". You know, in the United States, average height is like 5'9", 5'10", so I'm like 1 or 2 inches below average. And in Sweden, I don't really feel that short. You get the occasional guy that's taller than me, or, you know, occasional girl, but for the most part, it's pretty mixed. And another one I've heard is Swedish men are weak and soft. And you know what? There's just as much variation here as it has to do with the height. There are some very tough dudes that I would not want to meet in an alley alone in the dark that are Swedish. And then there's people that tend to be, I guess you could call them weak and soft possibly. It's very mixed. I think it just has to do with the fact that people from some cultures that are not used to an egalitarian culture where women and men are equal and the same, that they feel that maybe the men kind of are weak because of that for some reason. But that hasn't been my experience. I think it's really quite mixed. Number 8, Swedes make good chocolate. So this is an interesting one because when people tell me this, I'm like, yeah, a lot of people like Swedish chocolate, but I know what you're talking about. You're not talking about Swedish chocolate, you're talking about Swiss chocolate, because almost no one in the United States knows anything about Swedish chocolate. There will be a few. But I personally don't care for Swedish chocolate. I prefer Swiss chocolate, and there is a very big difference. I feel most of the Swedish chocolate that I've had, I don't like the flavor. It's very sweet. A lot of the typical ones like Marabou, you know, a lot of people eat that. I'm not a big fan of it. I'll tolerate it, but it's not my favorite thing. But I love Swiss chocolate. So I usually ask people, are you talking about Swiss chocolate, or are you talking about like what do you mean by Swedish chocolate? So I think that's just comes down to preference. And I think a lot of people like from the United States, like I said, are just referring to Swiss chocolate. And that's a common theme with these stereotypes, is a lot of stereotypes they're talking about Switzerland rather than Sweden because the names are easy to confuse, just like Austria and Australia. So I always have to make sure that the people know what they're talking about and be like, okay, are you talking about Switzerland or are you talking about Sweden? I remember I had my family reunion and I was going to be moving to Sweden. And after explaining to everybody I'm moving to Sweden, then they're all like, oh, have a wonderful time in Switzerland, after I'd just been explaining for hours that I was going to be going to Sweden. So it's something that's very easy to confuse. And it's not just an American thing. It's the same thing, especially in Spanish. A lot of my Spanish friends, the names for Sweden and Switzerland are almost the same. They're slightly different. And my Spanish-speaking friends still mix them up. And another one that I think they get confused with Switzerland is, oh, they have big mountains. I wouldn't say Sweden is really known for big mountains. There is a mountain called Kebnekaise. My pronunciation may be off on that because it's not an actually Swedish word. I think it actually comes from, there is a native population up there and they have their own language. And I don't think that's the mountain that they're usually referring to. I think they're usually talking about the Swiss mountains. And so, like I said, I usually have to be like, okay, are you talking about Switzerland? I have been all over Europe. I've been to 25 countries, and I would say the mountains that I have seen in Sweden are not that impressive. They're okay, but if you want to see impressive mountains, I would say I've lived in Alaska, I've been to Colorado, I've been to Canada, I've been to Norway, has spectacular mountains. I've been to New Zealand, but I don't really feel like Sweden is kind of like known for big mountains. Correct me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. And number 10, Swedes do not like small talk. I would say this is true and maybe not true. It depends on the situation. So generally speaking, like I said, there's always outliers, but Swedes have a reputation for not liking doing what they call kallprat, which is cold talk, or dödsprat, which is like death talk, which basically means meaningless conversation with strangers. Like, oh, you know, you're standing there waiting for the train and you just start striking up a conversation with a stranger about, oh, isn't it lovely weather we're having today? That's like, you know, typically in Sweden, you try to mind your own business, don't talk to strangers, have your headphones in. Otherwise, Swedes are going to think that there's something wrong with you. But then, of course, there are 10 to 20% of Swedes that don't fit this general stereotype. Now, on the other end, this is something that shocked me because I kind of like the fact that I don't have to talk to strangers. I have autism. I'm on the spectrum. And so it does create a lot of pressure for me, although I do sometimes, coming from the United States, like to make small talk just to, for that social need that I have once in a while. But it is nice not to have the pressure to talk to just anybody. However, I find opposite when it comes in the workplace. When you work with your coworkers, there is a lot of small talk, and I find it very exhausting because, in my opinion, I'm going to be straight up with you guys, and I'm like, y'all can tear me up in the comments. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I feel like you have to be fake at work, because they don't want you bringing in negativity or toxicity to work. They want you coming with a positive attitude. So the funny thing is, a lot of Swedes are like, oh, you Americans, you're so fake. Y'all smile and you're friendly, but you're so fake. And I'm like, are you projecting? Because that's the same thing I see at work. Because like literally, my grandfather died this week, and people don't want to hear about it. They want you to put your work face on and everything's hunky-dory, and you hear things like, well, life goes on, that we're all gonna die sometime. I'm just like, golly, very cold. And then, I'm sitting there, and perhaps y'all seen the memes of like small talk in the United States, like it's 7 o'clock in the morning, you're starting work and you hear all the women's voices like, oh, how was your day? And how are the animals and the chickens in the garden? And I'm like, it's the same thing here in Sweden. You don't get that like out in public, but at work, it's just like, oh, and what did you do for the weekend? Did you have a good weekend? Maybe you didn't have a good weekend, but it's like, you feel this pressure to be fake. Oh, my weekend was wonderful. And it's like, no, your grandpa died on the weekend, but it's like, no, nobody wants to hear it. That's my experience. Maybe you've had a different experience, just being honest. Like, we literally had a monthly meeting where we were told by leadership that we needed to smile and we needed to be positive and we need to greet everybody in the morning with happy faces and happy tone of voice. And I'm like, I don't have a problem being cordial and polite and good morning, but sometimes I'm just not feeling it in the morning. I'm sorry. But so it's fascinating that there's kind of like in Sweden, they can be a bit more reserved and not want to talk to strangers. But then on the flip side, at work, it's kind of like you're forced to talk to people. Like, whereas in the United States, if I don't feel like talking to people on my lunch break, I would just go have lunch by myself. I'd go for a walk and get my exercise, get some sun, whatever. Whereas it's kind of like you're forced to be with people that you would never normally choose to associate with. And now, granted, there are some people that, I appreciate and I like that I work with. But it's always awkward when you're in a group setting and you're like, I get along with all these people, but I know that person doesn't like that person. But then they're like being very fake with each other and just talking small talk. And it's so awkward. Number 11, Swedes are in good shape. This is another stereotype, and this is one that I thought until I moved to Sweden. And the ironic thing is, I work in a diabetes department. I am shocked with the amount of Um, there is a lot of people in very bad shape here in this country. There are people that are, I was talking to another nurse the other day. She's an ambulance nurse in Stockholm. And, we like to swap our battle stories as nurses and talk about, just experiences and stuff. And of course, we don't talk about patient names and everything, but we talk about the experiences and how we deal with it. And we kind of support each other. And she's talking about this patient who was trapped in their apartment for 7 years because they're too big to get in the elevator. And we were just talking about how such a shame it is that this person was trapped in there, and then they had a medical emergency, and there was like, how are we going to, they wouldn't fit in the elevator. So they had to drag them down the stairs on a mattress, and the patient's screaming in pain all the way down because there's no way else to get them. And then, of course, and the healthcare workers hurt their backs doing it. I thought this was only an American thing, but I work in diabetes and obesity is increasing. And this is by no means judging these people or anything like that. It's just I'm trying to kind of quench this stereotype that everybody in Sweden is like this supermodel, blonde, blue-eyed, thin, muscular, gorgeous looking people. And it's like, yeah, those kinds of people do exist. But we also have more processed food. Sweden is actually one of the highest consumers of processed food in Europe. And even children, we're starting to have more issues with kids not being in good shape. So that's another stereotype I would say I don't agree with. And along with that Swedes always eat healthy. There is a lot of processed food, as I said. There's a lot of sausage, a lot of very high salt content food. They eat a lot of food that's like already ready-made. There is a lot of, for example, they'll eat like macaroni. They'll like boil macaroni and put ketchup on it. I'm just like, what? Don't show that to an Italian. So I would say it depends on who you're with. Not all Swedes are unhealthy, but not all Swedes are healthy. We'll leave it at that. So that was 12 stereotypes that I have heard or hear about Swedish people and my point of view as an American living in Sweden. Let me know, do you agree, do you disagree? Tell me why. Are there any other stereotypes that I've missed? I'm sure there's some other ones that y'all can bring up and be interesting discussion. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.